Hello everyone, this is David from Automotive Press. Do you think the 2023 Toyota Sequoia is a good value or good deal? Well, if you actually compare side by side the new 2023 Sequoia to the much more expensive 2022 Lexus LX, which I have behind me, then you'll realize the 2023 Sequoia is bargain of the century. Yes, it's not a cheap vehicle by any means, but it's at least $20,000 to $30,000 cheaper than the LX, and you get almost everything that the Lexus LX offers, at least in terms of the powertrain and the functionality, because they both share the same engine, the same platform, the same frame, the same steering mechanism, and very similar suspension as well. So let me take you to the Lexus LX and show you the similarities between the Sequoia and the Lexus LX so that you'll realize how truly good value the new 2023 Toyota Sequoia is. Let's get right into it. Welcome back. So here I have the 2022 Lexus LX 600, which I have been driving for about a week or so. Very impressive package. A beautiful SUV with so much new features and technology, and it's absolutely amazing luxury SUV. However, most of us will not be able to afford something like this, and because the Toyota Land Cruiser is no longer available in the US for this year, well, the next best thing in terms of buying something close to the Lexus LX is the new Toyota Sequoia, which is all new for 2023. But is there really a huge difference in terms of what you get between the Lexus LX and the Toyota Sequoia? Well, in terms of luxury features and things like the sound quality of the stereo, absolutely there is a big difference. But in terms of practical things, the functional things between the two vehicles, you'll be surprised that they share a lot of common parts and features. So in many ways, buying the Toyota Sequoia is like buying a bargain priced Lexus LX. Let's start with exterior in terms of what the similarities are. Now, do keep in mind the Lexus LX 600 is built in Japan at the Yoshiwara factory, whereas the Toyota Sequoia is built in the Tundra factory, which is in San Antonio, Texas. So there could be some difference in terms of overall manufacturing quality between the two models. But as far as I can tell, based on my inspection of the vehicles, the Toyota Sequoia should be almost as well built as a Lexus LX. But what about the practical things? Well, obviously we're not going to get a huge Lexus grille like this, but in many ways the Sequoia is a better looking SUV in terms of the front end, because I'm not too crazy about the spindle grille that has all these lines going horizontally. And in terms of things like the headlight, we still get a pretty decent one in the Sequoia because it also has LED headlights. We also get the fog lamps in the Sequoia in much the same way as what we have in LX. Well, the wheels are obviously different in terms of shape and design, but even in the Sequoia, we have an option to get the 22-inch wheels and tire combination in much the same way we have one in this Lexus LX 600. The paint quality might be a little bit different, but the quality of the paint so far in the Tundra have been great, and therefore I'm going to assume that the Sequoia will have a pretty good paint job as well. Design-wise, of course, there's a fair amount of difference in terms of the details between the two, but actually the overall shape and the overall profile of the Lexus LX compared to the Sequoia is surprisingly similar. We have a difference in terms of the C-pillar and the way that the back end looks, but in many ways, somehow the Lexus LX has a bit of a Toyota look, and there's more similarity to the Sequoia rear than it was before. So once again, from far away, you might mistake a Sequoia for the Lexus LX if it wasn't for these fancy badges and so forth. Well, what else? In terms of things like a running board and some other accessories for the rooftop and so forth, of course you get almost everything that the Lexus LX has in the Sequoia, so not a huge difference. And then in terms of the size and the dimension, it's going to be quite similar as well. The Lexus LX, it's about 200 inches in terms of overall length, and actually quite similar to the Sequoia. which is going to be a little bit longer, and it's definitely a little bit wider, especially if you look at the Sequoia TRD Pro, which has sort of a wide body, and therefore it has the marker lamps in the front because it's over 80 inches. That is definitely not the case with the Lexus LX600, but the length and the height is quite similar, and therefore the interior dimension will be similar as well. And if anything, the Sequoia will offer slightly more room inside because it is slightly larger in terms of exterior design. Now also, if you go underneath this SUV, which you can't see right now, almost everything is shared. So we do get the same platform, which is a TNGA-F platform. The actual frame itself is very similar, if not identical, between the Lexus LX and the Toyota Sequoia. And almost everything that's attached to that frame is also similar and common between the Lexus LX and the Toyota Sequoia. That includes the 3.4-liter twin-turbo V6 engine and a 10-speed automatic transmission, which is designed and produced by a company called Aishin, which is a very well-known transmission company that is owned by Toyota and obviously is Japan-based supplier. Now keep in mind that Sequoia has the hybrid version of the 3.4-liter twin-turbo V6, so it has substantially more power and torque than the Lexus LX. Although I suspect Lexus will be offering the hybrid version of the LX sometime down the road, perhaps next year. But for now, the Sequoia actually has an advantage in terms of power and torque. And because the frame is shared across not just between the Lexus LX and Sequoia, but also with the Tundra, the Land Cruiser 300 series sold in Japan, as well as the upcoming Tacoma and the upcoming 4Runner, they all tend to have similar design and functionality, which means everything that's attached to the frame, such as the braking system and some of the suspension components, are also very similar, if not identical, between the Lexus and the Toyota Sequoia, as well as with some other models such as the Tundra and the Land Cruiser 300. Now let's take a look at the inside, where there might be the biggest difference between the Lexus and the Toyota Sequoia. Okay, so now I'm inside the Lexus LX600, and of course there is a much bigger difference in terms of the design and the features between the Lexus LX600 and the Toyota Sequoia because you're paying for those extras when it comes to the Lexus model. However, once again, when it comes to functional things, it's not as much difference as you would think. So for example, in the Toyota Sequoia, you still get 12.3 inches full digital cluster, at least in the higher trim levels, which is somewhat similar to what we get in Lexus LX600. And in fact, the center console design is actually better because we get a 14-inch single display in the center stack, whereas in Lexus LX we get a split design with two panels. And I know there is some advantage to having two different panels that display different kind of information, but for the most part I think it's a bit annoying and not as practical as having a single infotainment system. So I would say in the Toyota Sequoia with a single 14-inch display, I actually think it's easier and more practical than the one that we see here in the Lexus LX. Now clearly in the Lexus LX600 you get more leather, more stitching, more handcrafted components than the Toyota Sequoia, and therefore the Sequoia would not look as luxurious and as impressive as the Lexus LX600. But function to function, feature for feature, you don't get a lot more in the LX600 than the Sequoia for the everyday driver. Now, if you are a type of person who actually has a chauffeur who's driving your vehicle and you're sitting in the back, there is a big difference between the LX and Sequoia because Lexus LX600 has kind of like a first class mode for the rear seat where you can almost lay flat with legs stretched out, and it's a beautiful place to spend time. And we don't have that feature or that option in the Sequoia because Toyota Sequoia is designed for the everyday driver who actually want to drive the vehicle and not have a chauffeur driving the vehicle, if you know what I mean. And Lexus also have a better stereo system with the Mark Levinson compared to the JBL system in the Toyota Sequoia, which is likely pretty good already, but it will not be anywhere as good as what we have in the Lexus. But those might be very minor sacrifices, especially when you consider there will be $20,000 to $30,000 difference, maybe even $40,000 difference in price, depending on which model you pick, between the Lexus and the Toyota SUV. So let's take a look at some of these details. Well, if you look at the steering wheel, the Sequoia one obviously looks different. It's simpler. You don't get this kind of wood trims over here, but most of the functions that you see on the steering, you also get it in the Sequoia. So yes, it does look fancier, but you're not losing any practicality on the Sequoia. As I mentioned, the digital dash is somewhat different in terms of design, but you get similar functionality and you get full 12.3 inch of a digital display in the Sequoia. You don't get this fancy leather and stitching on the Sequoia, but actually the design of the Sequoia, especially in the capstone version, is pretty good. We got the Apple Car display, which is on both vehicles. Again, this one has the split display, which I'm not too crazy about. Lots of buttons here, which is also the case with the Sequoia. And you get some of these functionalities such as the cruise control, MTS, and so forth, which are all available on the Sequoia, depending on which model you pick. You get ventilation and also heating for the seat, which is also on the Sequoia. And we have here the heater for the steering. And maybe one difference is that on the Sequoia, you get partial heating, which is usually here and here. And on the Lexus, you'll get a full heating here. So yeah, there is a bit of a minor difference. You get also a mode here for driving select, Sport and Sport S Plus. You get something similar in the Sequoia as well. And you have electric parking brake, which is also found in the Sequoia. What else? Well, the glove compartment is glove compartment, not much difference there. Again, you get fancier leather here and more stitching here, and the overall design is a beautiful design in the Lexus LX. But really, in the capstone version at least of the Sequoia, it doesn't look bad at all, with a beautiful, if somewhat different design. And a lot of people might say, you know what, the capstone Sequoia looks good enough for me. So the design of the seats are quite different between the Sequoia and the Lexus LX 600. We get this fancy stitching on the LX, but not too bad looking on the Sequoia, as I mentioned. But the rear seat is where there are more differences, because not only do we get this fancy center console with additional display and control, in this particular executive VIP package, we also have an option to recline this seat and then to be able to stretch your leg all the way against this seat, because this seat also moves forward. So that's something we don't get in Sequoia, but once again, that only matters if you have someone who's chauffeur driving your vehicle and then you are the passenger in the back, which for the most of us doesn't apply. In this executive package, you also get two huge display in the back for other controls and for perhaps watching a show or two. We don't have that as well in the Sequoia, but all these things are really to take care of the rear passenger, which might not matter too much for most of us. So as you can see, there are obviously some differences and perhaps some important differences between the Lexus LX 600 and Toyota Sequoia. And if you're a type of person who absolutely love the Lexus brand, well, you're not going to consider the Toyota Sequoia just because the two brands are quite different. But in terms of the functionality, the practicality, the basic performance, and then the things like engine and transmission, suspension, those are actually quite similar between the Toyota Sequoia and the Lexus LX 600. And even though you don't get everything transferred over from the Lexus to the Toyota Sequoia, you get a lot of them. And don't forget that all Sequoias come in hybrid format. So it does use the same 3.4 liter twin turbo V6 engine as the Lexus LX. But for now, the Sequoia has an advantage because it has a hybrid mechanism to go with the engine, whereas the Lexus LX is not offered with hybrid yet. And therefore, the Sequoia has a lot more power and torque, which is a big advantage. So from my perspective, if you want to save $20,000, $25,000, maybe even $30,000, then the Toyota Sequoia, which is all new for 2023, is a bargain of the century because it's a lot like the Lexus LX 600 without all the fancy stuff which you might not even want anyway, particularly if you're the type of person who don't need a chauffeur to drive you around with you in the back seat. So what do you think in terms of comparison of the Toyota Sequoia versus Lexus LX 600? Do you agree that you get most of the practical and technical and the functional stuff in the 2023 Sequoia that you already have in the Lexus LX 600? Or what do you think? Are you a type of person who will never buy the Toyota Sequoia simply because you love the Lexus brand? Anyhow, I hope you found this video useful and practical because I love comparing different models and different brands, even within the same family of products, such as Lexus versus the Toyota. Let me know in the comments below if you want to know anything else about the Toyota Sequoia or Lexus LX600, or anything to do with the TNGA-F platform vehicles, many of which are still yet to come. So that's it for now, folks. If you're able to give me a thumbs up, make some comments, and subscribe, that'll be truly appreciated. But until next video, I'm signing off for now. Thank you so much.